Welcome to HFY Beyond Terra, where humanity doesn't just survive, it becomes the galaxy's biggest surprise. Subscribe, and let's go beyond Terra.
They told me the Queen's Gala would be safe because the walls were old. Ancient stone, layered alloys, ceremonial shields that had faced meteors and mutinies. The kind of architecture that convinces diplomats they're inside history and convinces assassins to try anyway, because history breeds arrogance. I didn't trust old walls. I trusted protocols, and even those only when someone had recently bled for them. My name is Elias Rook. I was hired as an external security auditor, human, neutral, cheap enough to offend the palace and useful enough to keep. I'd been on the orbital rim for 4 years, bouncing between contracts that paid in credits and silence. I had a reputation for being difficult. The palace steward called it ungracious. The royal marshal called it thorough. The queen, her radiant Sereth Val, never called it anything. She watched. That was the first thing I noticed about her. She listened with her eyes. Not in the predatory way courtiers do, but in the way a surgeon watches a patient's breathing, tracking rhythm, looking for an irregularity no one else is trained to see. The second thing I noticed was her hands. They were steady. On the afternoon of the gala, I stood in the Hall of Accord beneath banners that had outlasted empires. Dignitaries in embroidered cloaks drifted like ornate fish through a warm, perfumed sea. The musicians played something ancient and carefully non-threatening. I moved the opposite way against the flow through the seams. A human in matte black formal wear looks like a spill in a room full of jewels. Marshal Tavan, a granite-faced Valeri whose uniform could have been carved from his own bones, fell into step beside me. "You have audited our scans twice," he said. "Our guards have been insulted thrice." "Then you're improving," I replied. His nostrils flared. "Tonight is not the night for your humor." "Tonight is never the night," I said and pointed at the archway over the dais. "That support beam is decorative, it's hollow. It houses lighting. And conduits," I said, "and access. It is sealed. Sealed is a story, I'm asking for a fact." He stared at me long enough that I could feel the room's impatience press against my back. Then he spoke into his wrist. When the access panel popped 5 minutes later, quiet as a liar's apology, I didn't look at Tavan. I didn't need to. Inside, there was a maintenance spine big enough for a slender body to crawl. Tavan's jaw tightened. "No one would choose that route. No one who wants comfort," I said. "Assassins don't." He turned away, barking orders, already trying to make the problem smaller by making the people around it move faster. That's what marshals do. They build speed to outrun shame. I didn't chase him. I looked up at the dais instead, at the empty chair that would soon hold the most photographed person in this sector. The queen arrived at sunset, because tradition demanded she enter as the light turned, like a star taking command of the sky. Her entourage spread around her in a practice constellation. Advisors, guards, ceremonial attendants with bowls of salt and flame. She took her seat without hurry, and then she looked directly at me, not at my uniform, not at my badge, not at the marshal next to her. At me. I felt the peculiar pressure of being seen by someone whose gaze was trained on survival. For a fraction of a moment, her expression softened, not warmth, not friendliness, but recognition, as if she had already marked me as an outlier in a room that prized conformity. Then the musicians swelled and the ceremony began. Speeches, oaths, a signing of documents with ink so rare it had to be guarded like a weapon. The gala was designed to show stability, a queen calm enough to host 1,000 guests, a court confident enough to drink openly, a government so secure it could afford beauty. That's what made my skin crawl. The more a system performs safety, the more it hates reminders that safety is a rehearsal, not a guarantee. Halfway through the second toast, my comms clicked, a whisper of static and a single, clipped word from one of my motion sensors. "Ghost!" My spine went cold. I slid my hand into my jacket as if adjusting the line of fabric. My fingers closed around a compact shock pistol, not lethal, but effective enough to break bones through cloth. I moved toward the dais, threading between laughing nobles. Marshal Tavan's head snapped in my direction as if he'd felt the shift in air. His hand went toward his sidearm, but he was too far. The queen was closer, and so was the threat. I saw it because I'd been trained to see things that didn't belong. The way a servant's tray sat half a centimeter too high, the way a bracelet caught light at the wrong angle, the way a line of shadows formed a corridor where there shouldn't have been one. Above the dais, within the hollow arch I'd flagged, a seam darkened. A panel shifted. Something small and metallic unfurled like a silver insect. Not a gun, not a blade. A drone no larger than my palm with petals of folded alloy that opened as it descended. I didn't have time to shout. I didn't have time to think about the dignity of 1,000 guests. I lunged. The drone released its payload with a soft click. A filament, almost invisible, shot forward, straight toward the queen's throat. I moved into it. Pain is an honest language. It doesn't negotiate. The filament cut into my shoulder and across my chest like a wire drawn by a furious hand. Heat, then cold, then a spreading numbness that tried to trick my body into accepting death as rest. My shock pistol fired reflexively. The bolt caught the drone midair. It spasmed, sparks blooming like a violent flower, and fell onto the dais with a sound like dropped jewelry. For a heartbeat, the hall didn't understand what had happened. Then the queen stood, not recoiling, not screaming, standing. "Seal the hall," she said, voice clear enough to slice through music and confusion. "Now!" Marshal Tavan was suddenly a storm. Guards poured in from concealed doors. The musicians faltered, stopped, then stared at their instruments as if they'd betrayed the room. I staggered. My hand pressed to my chest came away wet and too warm. The filament had been coated. I could smell it even through the copper tang of blood, a sharp chemical bitterness. Poison, a lethal design fast enough that even a ruler's medics would struggle. My knees buckled. I expected the queen to retreat behind the wall of her guards. That was the script. That was how courts survived, by making the sovereign a symbol, not a body. Instead, she stepped down from the dais and crossed the distance to me. Her entourage shouted, some in fear, some in fury. Marshal Tavan reached for her arm. She brushed him away with a single motion. Then she knelt beside me right there on the polished floor among spilled wine and rising panic. Her hands, steady, caught my shoulders. "Human," she said softly, close enough that only I could hear. "Look at me." I forced my eyes to focus. Her irises were the color of deep water under moonlight. There was no hysterical terror in them, only calculation sharpened by something I couldn't name. "It's poison," I managed. "I know." Her fingers pressed gently around the wound, assessing the cut like she'd done this before, like she'd held dying people and learned the geography of their pain. I coughed. It hurt like my ribs were glass. "Your medics, they will come," she said, "but you will not drift away before they arrive." "That's not how—" "Hush." The command was quiet, but it landed like a gavel. "You took what was meant for me. You do not get to decide. You are done." Somewhere behind her, Marshal Tavan barked orders. Someone screamed about a second device. Guests surged against the sealed doors. The smell of fear rose, sour and thick. I tried to move my arm. It didn't obey. The queen's hand tightened on my shoulder, not enough to hurt, but enough to anchor. "Stay awake," she said. "I'm trying." Her gaze flicked up, scanning the hall. "Assassins choose nights like this because the noise covers them. The crowd gives them exits, but you severed their timing." "Lucky," I whispered. She looked back down at me. "No, disciplined." The word hit me harder than the pain. No one praises a bodyguard while he bleeds, not in courts. In courts, bodies are used and then forgotten. Praise is for survivors with clean hands. The queen didn't seem to know that rule, or she knew it and had decided it was beneath her. A medic team finally forced its way through the guards. They wore white and silver, faces set in practiced calm. One of them, a thin Valari with scanning lenses embedded in his cheekbones, stopped short when he saw the queen on the floor. "Radiance, please," he began. "Treat him," she said. The medic hesitated. "We must ensure—" "Treat him," she repeated, and there was steel now cold enough to freeze hesitation in midair. "That is an order." They dropped beside me, their instruments unfolding like mechanical lilies. A scanner swept my wound. The medic's lenses flashed. "Filament laced with—" He paused, disbelief breaking his composure. "Nightglass compound." Tavan swore. "That is reserved for war." "Then someone believes we are already in one," the queen said. The medic injected something into my neck. Fire flooded my veins, then a numb heaviness. The world blurred at the edges. I gripped the queen's wrist, weak but desperate. "If I pass out, then you will awaken," she said. That certainty, unearned, impossible, kept me from slipping. The medic shook his head. "Radiance, he must be moved to a sterile bay. The toxin will spread." "Then we move," she said. Tavan leaned in. "With respect, Radiance, you must be evacuated first. There may be a second attempt." The queen's eyes sharpened. "If there is a second attempt, it will come to where I am. The assassins do not hunt shadows. They hunt symbols. Tonight, the symbol is beside this human." Tavan's mouth opened, then closed. He looked, for the first time, uncertain. I understood then her decision wasn't only compassion. It was strategy. She was choosing to turn herself into bait, controlled bait, to draw out whoever thought they could strike again. And she was doing it while keeping me alive. They lifted me onto a stretcher. Pain pulsed with each motion, but the injection dulled the edges. The hall warped into moving color. I felt the queen's presence near my head as we rolled through service corridors behind the grand facade of the palace. Air here smelled of metal and disinfectant instead of incense. Guards ran ahead, others formed a tight ring. Tavan walked at the queen's shoulder, his face a thundercloud. "You are gambling with your life," he hissed. "I am spending it," she replied. "There is a difference." We reached a junction where the corridor split. The palace's internal lights flickered just once like a blink. Every guard's weapon snapped up. The medic swore under his breath. "Power fluctuation." "Not power," I rasped. "Signal." "Someone's trying to blind your sensors." The queen leaned over me. "Can you speak more?" "Maintenance spine," I said. "Above the dais, access panel, hollow arch," Tavan snarled. "We found it, no one." The Queen's voice was calm. "Not no one, someone who left before we looked." We rounded the corner toward the medical wing. That's when the ceiling panel dropped. A figure fell from above, silent, sleek, armored in black like the void between stars. The assassin landed with a grace that made my stomach drop. Not because of beauty, because of training. She moved too fast for most eyes. A blade flashed, aimed not at the Queen, but at the medic carrying the antitoxin case. Smart. Cut the cure, let the poison finish the job. I don't remember deciding to move. I only remember the raw refusal that surged through me. My hand shot out from the stretcher and caught the medic's wrist, yanking the case toward me. The blade struck my forearm instead. White pain detonated. I screamed loud enough to scrape my throat. The antitoxin case thudded onto my chest, held there by my useless arm and stubborn fingers. The guards fired. The assassin twisted, using the corridor's narrowness as cover, deflecting bolts with a shimmering field. Then the Queen stepped forward, not behind her guards, forward. She raised her open hand. "Stop," she said. For a fraction of a second, everyone hesitated, because they had been trained to obey her voice before their instincts. The assassin hesitated too, and that was enough. The Queen's other hand snapped up, not empty now. A small ceremonial rod, something that would have looked harmless in the gala hall, crackled with blue energy at its tip, a shock scepter. She drove it into the assassin's field at close range. The air screamed. The shimmer collapsed. Guards slammed the assassin into the wall, pinning limbs, disarming with brutal efficiency. Taven's sidearm pressed to the assassin's head. The Queen didn't look at her captured attacker. She looked at me, blood soaked my sleeve. My fingers trembled around the antitoxin case. Her steady hands came down on my chest over the case, keeping it from sliding. "You see," she said, voice low, "you are still here." My vision tunneled. "Barely. Barely is sufficient," she replied. "You did not bleed for nothing." The medics tore open the case and injected the antitoxin into my IV port. Coolness spread through me, chasing the fire that had started in my shoulder. The assassin struggled, then laughed, a dry, distorted sound through a voice filter. "Staying with him will not save your throne," the assassin said. The Queen's gaze finally shifted, cold as vacuum. "Who sent you?" Silence. Taven pressed harder. "Speak, worm." The assassin tilted their head. "You think this ends with one blade? Your court is a feast of knives." The Queen's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Remove the mask." When the guards tore it off, the corridor went very still. The assassin was Valeri. Not an outsider, not a rebel from the fringe, a palace-born operative marked by the subtle sigils behind the ear that identified a noble house. Taven's face drained of color. "House Serene, a noble faction, old money, old grudges." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "Serene has been allowed to fester for too long." The assassin bared teeth. "You will not have proof." The Queen looked down at me again, and something, not softness but fierce intent, burned in her expression. "Proof," she said, "is a public thing." She gestured to a guard. "Record, now." A lens drone floated up, capturing the scene. The assassin unmasked, the noble sigils visible, the Queen kneeling again by the bleeding human who had taken the first strike meant for her. Then she spoke, not to the assassin, but to the drone, knowing full well where that recording would go. "Tonight," she said, "an attempt was made on my life. It failed because a human who owes me nothing chose to stand between my throat and a war toxin. He bleeds still. I do not retreat from those who bleed in my defense." Taven's throat bobbed. He looked for the first time like a man watching his world change. The Queen continued, "If any house believes it can purchase my death with darkness, let it understand I remain, I witness, and I will answer." The assassin spat blood. "You'll start a civil fracture." "I will cauterize an infection," the Queen corrected. "There is a difference." My pulse roared in my ears. The antitoxin steadied my breathing, but exhaustion pressed down like a planet. The Queen's hand, still steady, brushed my forehead, wiping away sweat and blood with the care of someone who had no fear of stains. "Elias Rook," she said, using my name for the first time, "do you regret it?" It was a strange question to ask a man who could barely lift his head. I found the strength to answer honestly. "No," she nodded once, as if confirming a hypothesis. "Then neither do I," she said. "Stay with me a little longer." I tried to smile. It came out crooked. "What happens now?" Her gaze turned down the corridor toward the palace heart where politics lived and hid. "Now we make it impossible for them to pretend this was rumor. We make it impossible for them to call you expendable." My eyelids fluttered. "Why?" "Because," she said, and for the first time her voice carried something like quiet heat. "A throne that consumes loyalty without honoring it is not a throne worth defending. And I intend to be defended by people who can still look at themselves afterward." That more than the poison made me dizzy. They moved me into a sterile bay. Machines hummed. Medics worked with urgent precision, sealing cuts, flushing toxins, knitting tissue with light. Above me, the ceiling was a clean white, nothing like the grand hall's carved history. The Queen stood at my bedside the entire time, not in the doorway, not behind glass, beside me. Advisors arrived, frantic and furious. They argued in low, intense bursts. They cited tradition, optics, risk. They begged her to rest, to hide, to let the marshal handle it. She listened with her eyes, then she said simply no. When they left because a Queen's no is a door slammed in the face of protocol, Marshal Tavan remained. He looked at me, then at her. Radiance, he said quietly, you are rewriting doctrine. Doctrine is written in ink, she replied. Tonight was written in blood. Tavan swallowed. And if the court punishes you for this, the Queen's gaze didn't waver. Then the court will learn what punishment looks like. Tavan bowed stiffly and left. Silence settled, machines beeped, my breathing steadied. The antitoxin did its work, dragging me back from the edge. I turned my head. The Queen sat in a plain chair near my bed, her regal attire replaced by a simple cloak someone had brought her. Without the gala's glittering armor, she looked, if not ordinary, then more real. You should sleep, I rasped. So should you, she replied. Then why are you still here? She studied me for a long moment. In that gaze, I felt again that surgeon's attention, watching for the truth behind my words. Because you did not let me become an absence, she said at last. A dead queen is a story others tell. A living queen is a will that must choose. You forced me to choose what kind of will I am. I swallowed, throat dry. And, she leaned forward slightly. And I discovered I am not the kind that runs while someone bleeds for me. The room seemed smaller than it had. I let out a shaky breath. You made yourself a target. Yes, she said, and you made yourself a shield. We both made choices. Now we will live with them. My eyelids sagged. Did we get them? The assassin is contained, she said. House Saren will wake to an unpleasant dawn. I managed. Good. A pause. Then she added, Elias, when you are able to stand, I will ask something of you. I frowned. More than bleeding? A faint curve touched her mouth. Not a smile exactly, but the shape of one. Not more, different. I waited, but she didn't continue. I drifted in and out for hours. Each time I surfaced, she was still there, reading reports on a small slate, issuing orders in calm tones, never leaving my bedside for long. At one point, a servant brought her food. She ate it one-handed while her other hand rested on the bedrail near my fingers as if proximity itself was a tether. When the palace alarms finally quieted, dawn light bled through the bay's narrow window, thin, pale, clean. The Queen stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city beyond the palace walls. A city that believed in her, feared her, needed her. She spoke without turning. They will say this night was weakness. I forced my voice out. Let them. They will say I endangered myself for a single human. You did, I said, and you didn't. She turned slightly, acknowledging the distinction. I stayed, she said, almost to herself. That is what they cannot forgive because it means I am not separate from consequences. Leaders should not be, I murmured. She looked at me then, and in her eyes I saw something new, resolve sharpened into a blade. I will summon the court at midday, she said. I will play the recording. I will name House Saren. I will strip them of privilege and seize their assets, and I will restructure the guard so that no marshal ever again believes sealed is a fact. Tavan would hate that last part. Tradition would scream. But tradition, I realized, was just the memory of who had gotten away with things before. And me? I asked. The Queen returned to the chair beside my bed and sat as if she belonged there. You, she said, will recover. That's optimistic. It is an order, she said, and the faint, almost smile returned. Then it faded, replaced by seriousness. And when you can walk, I will offer you a position, not as ornament, not as token, but as a person with authority. I blinked. You're hiring me. I am binding you, she corrected, if you accept. And if I do, her steady hands folded in her lap. Then you will leave with wealth and protection, and my gratitude will follow you like a shadow, but it will be a waste. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the machine's steady beep. My body ached. My arm throbbed. My chest felt like it had been stitched by fire. I thought of the way she had knelt on a palace floor in front of 1,000 witnesses. The way she had used my blood as a public declaration, not a hidden inconvenience. The way she had refused to let me disappear into acceptable losses. In my line of work, gratitude was rare. Honor was rarer. And yet here it was, sitting beside me at dawn like it had always belonged there. I'll consider it, I said, because I wasn't stupid enough to say yes while drugged and half dead. The Queen nodded, accepting the negotiation. Good. She reached out and with a gentleness that didn't diminish her power, covered my hand with hers. Elias, she said, voice quiet but absolute, I will not forget this. The words should have sounded ceremonial. They didn't. They sounded like a promise carved into stone. Outside, the palace began to wake to the aftermath. Somewhere, conspirators would be burning documents. Somewhere, loyalists would be gathering courage. Somewhere, House Saren would be learning that their knives had cut deeper than they intended. And in this sterile bay, with dawn light on my bandages, I understood what the night had truly changed. I had saved a queen from death. But she had saved me from being the kind of man who bleeds in silence. While I bled, she stayed. And because she stayed, the empire would never look at its own violence the same way again.